Everybody to Trees and Design Action Group meeting on tree costs and financing options. So Trees and Design Action Group, as you'll probably all know by now, is a network. It's a forum. It brings people together and organizations together to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in the planning, design, construction, and management and maintenance of our urban places. Evidence-based information is really important, which is why the people presenting today have been chosen to do so. And as is knowledge exchange, cross-sector working. So the one format, and we really encourage, hence the one format, and we really encourage, your presentations. So I'd like to thank the partners today, the Institution of Highway Engineers, the Chartered Institution of Highways and Transportation, and the Arboricultural Association, and of course our TDAG sponsors who are all on our website. So now I'm going to hand over to Susanna. So Susanna Gill, who many of you may know, I first met in 2008 when she gave what I considered a groundbreaking talk on her PhD, which she had done with Roland Enos, on how increasing tree cover in central Manchester by 10% could reduce heat by 4%, if I got that right, Susanna. And since then, she's been working with the Mersey Forest, specialising in strategy research and development with a focus on green infrastructure and natural capital. She led the development of the award-winning Mersey Forest Plan and is leading on its refresh for 2025. And Trees and Design Action Group are very pleased to be able to be part of that, because I think that's going to be a very useful document for everybody. She completed her PhD at the University of Manchester in 2006, looking at the role of green infrastructure, urban green infrastructure, in adapting cities for climate change. So we have a very well qualified host today. So thanks, Susanna, and over to you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be chairing today's session. As Sue said, I'm from the Mersey Forest, and my role within the forest team is to currently to refresh our Mersey Forest plan, so our kind of long-term strategic guide to the work that we do. For those of you that don't know, Mersey Forest is one of England's now 15 community forests, and the Community Forest Programme is England's largest environmental regeneration initiative. So it was set up in the early 1990s to use tree and woodland establishment to bring about the wider benefits that they can bring in and around some of our largest towns and cities. So collectively now we cover 20% of England, where 29% of the population live. So the Mersey Forest is a partnership which includes 7 local authorities in Cheshire and Merseyside, and has established over 9 million trees since its outset. And now, of course, with national government targets to increase tree canopy cover to 16.5% of England by 2050, there's an increasing drive towards even greater levels of tree establishment across the country. So we all know that there's many challenges involved in reaching that target. And today's session, we're going to be unpicking some of those challenges in greater detail. So we'll be looking in particular at the costs associated with establishing and looking after trees in urban environments, whether that's within new developments or retrofitting them into our existing landscapes. And we'll be looking at some of the financing options available for these. Now, we all know that urban trees can deliver a wide range of social, economic and environmental benefits, from improving our health and well-being, helping our cities adapt to climate change and so on. And many of those benefits we can quantify, some of them we can also monetize. So we can start to demonstrate, for example, how tree establishment can lead to savings for the healthcare system as a result of improved air quality and so on. However, before those benefits are realised, there's upfront costs that have to be paid in order to establish trees and ensure their ongoing survival and success. So today we've got some fantastic speakers lined up who are going to help us to explore this topic. They'll be setting out some of the actual costs involved in tree and woodland establishment and different approaches to financing those that have been shown to be successful and fair. We realise that today's session is really just the starting point of the conversation that needs to take place. So I guess what we're hoping to to get to at some point is some clarity at a national scale around the costs of planting, establishing and maintaining trees within an urban context. So, for example, for adopted street trees in particular, at the moment, there's no currently agreed national standard for commuted sums. So different local authorities are asking developers to contribute different amounts towards these trees, which undoubtedly leads to a lot of confusion in the sector. And Sue has said that the highways officers who attend these TDAG sessions have been asking for some clearer national guidance on that. So I guess a question for today's meeting is how could we go about developing such a national standard, and whether that's to think about as we're going through, whether that's something that you could support or potentially help with. So I guess a really important aspect of today is that we want to hear from you. So each of you is bringing your own expertise and experience to this topic. We'd like to encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts and comments, and that then hopefully this is a piece of work we can develop collectively following on from this meeting today. And I know that TDAG are especially keen to hear from people following on from the meeting. So please do send through any relevant information that you may have to help with this work. So with that said, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker today, who is Philip Simpkin, the Natural Environment Officer at Buckinghamshire Council. And he's going to talk about what it costs to plant and maintain a tree in hard and soft landscapes. So Philip, over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Let me just get my screen sorted out so that I can share it. I need to open my presentation up, then find the screen share button. Sorry, just take me a moment to faff about. Hopefully not too many moments. On that one. Okay, it looks like I'm sharing my screen. So yes, I'm in an interim role as the ecology team leader at Buckinghamshire at the moment. But for context, I have a background. I was a tree officer for about I don't know, something like 15 years. So yes, looking at the costs to plant and maintain tree in hard and soft landscapes. So what does nature do versus what we do? So nature just goes and plants trees all over the place in woodlands, and if you've looked at any kind of the iTree studies for towns in the UK, the sycamores seem to plant themselves all over the place without too much difficulty. Whereas when we plant trees, it can be quite a costly exercise with large amounts of engineering works involved, and so it's quite a different prospect involved in all the planning and work and everything else. And the tree itself is actually quite a small part of that cost. What I have done in the past, I've been talking with TDAG and Sue and others for a while about trying to pull together, well, I know it's something Sue's been trying to get to an idea of costs for a long time, and I'd played around producing a bit of a spreadsheet, which I'll present a bit more later, but I put this slide together just to kind of think about a little bit of a mind map, with starting from that little picture in the middle of someone thinking about planting a tree, and all the different things that might be involved, from the tree itself. This is the kind of order I'll be going through things, talking about the tree itself, kind of different planting scenarios, a little bit about the kind of planning and authorization, a bit about the short-term establishment, and then the long-term management. So just thinking about the tree on its own, there's the cost of the tree varies hugely. If you're planting thousands of trees in a woodland, then you're going to be planting tiny little bare-rooted whips, which are really quite cheap to move, cheap to grow, and cheap to plant. Whereas semi-mature trees, much more expensive. They're taken years to get to that size, and then you've got to move them you can only fit a few on a lorry. It takes quite a lot of equipment to get them planted, and then if you have to replace it, there's extra costs there. So that's one aspect of the tree, but it's not just about the size, the way in which you source that tree. If it's a bare root, it's going to tend to be cheaper than a root ball or a containerized tree, both of which are heavier, so are more expensive to move. And then other things like the individual species, there's quite a lot of variation in the costs. Some trees are quite easy to grow, and some trees actually there might not be a huge amount of supply, and so that pushes up the cost. And even the provenance, if you're wanting a particular provenance of tree, then you're going to be limited by where you can get those from. So that's just one aspect. Then thinking about different scenarios in which we plant trees. So plant trees in woodlands, plant trees in hedgerows. There are 2 tabs that I've kind of included in my spreadsheet, but I guess the place in which many of the times we think about planting trees is kind of as individual standard trees, and there's a few different scenarios in which we plant standard trees. So as a standard tree in kind of a grass verge or in a soft landscape or in a park, it's relatively straightforward. You just need things like stakes and ties and maybe a watering bag and maybe a strimmer guard. Relatively simple kind of equipment involved to plant it, just a spade to dig a hole and plant it. Maybe in a soft veg you've got a bit more involved. You might need to think about whether there's any services there. That takes extra cost, kind of either finding out where the services are from the companies who own them, or kind of going out and doing scans using a CAT scan or to find them. Maybe you want to, if the verge limits the size of the rooting volume of soil, maybe there'll be kind of root runs to connect with another area of green space, less frequently though, or maybe there'll be root barriers if there's something that needs to be protected. But this is the simpler end of the tree planting of a standard tree. It's just the tree and a few other bits and pieces. We go look at the more urbanized tree planting. It's much more of an engineering job. So much more of the money goes into actually creating the hole that the tree is going to go into, and whether that's using plastic crates, maybe as a raft system to kind of spread the load underneath the surface. Because in an urban space, as I'm sure everyone knows, you need to cater for what that surface is going to be used for. You might need to take quite a lot of weight. You can't just lay a hard surface on just uncompacted soil, but if you compact the soil, then it's not going to be good for the tree roots to grow in. So you have to cater for both of those things, and that's why you end up having plastic crates or silver cell, strata cell. Other cells might be available, or structural soil, such as a kind of skeleton stone system, such as the Stockholm system, or medium soil size stone, such as Cornell or Amsterdam soil. So you're having to provide pretty much all of the volume for the tree to grow, because in an urban area it might not have a kind of open, uncompacted areas, and so you've then got to put all of this into that hole. That all costs money. Well, as I'll go on to a little bit more in terms of the, I guess a little bit like in a verge, you might have to think about stats. So that much more if you're digging a larger hole in a town centre. There'll be loads of stats. There'll be lots involved in getting maybe road closures, maybe getting cultivation licenses. And maybe you're going to be incorporating SUD systems, and then the other paraphernalia that goes with it. The decorative grills and guards are much more expensive than just a kind of a stake and a watering tube if you're going to use that that you might use in a green space or a gator bag. The planning and authorization process is a whole nother thing that is often not thought about. Now, in light blue here, I've included things that I haven't included in the model and the spreadsheet, but they're important factors to think in. The in the lead up to planting, you need to make the case for the urban forest and have a study and maybe a strategy. You don't necessarily have to, but that can help then get the funds to do the tree planting. And then you kind of think, right, now we've got the funds, how are we going to spend that? Are we going to be planting lots of trees in green spaces, or are we going to focus on going for those trees in harder landscapes where they're going to make perhaps more of an impact? More people will see them, maybe more of an urban cooling effect, but more expense involved. And then the darker blue is things that I have tried to include in the thinking in the kind of a cost model, the project management of planting the tree, finding a site. That can take a while to work out all the constraints and finding suitable sites. Designing, you may get landscape architects or engineers involved, seeking authorization to spend the money if you're in the council, or just an agreement from landowners, cultivation licenses, as I've mentioned, and then getting the contractors, maybe different contractors for digging the hole and putting everything in place and replacing the surface, to the contractors who are actually planting the tree. Short-term maintenance, so establishment, is absolutely vital. No point in planting a tree if you're going to just let it die. That's especially so if you're spending a lot of money on it, but there can be a lot of variation in the costs. If you plant all your trees all together in a park, say you plant 10 trees in a park together, then that's going to be a lot cheaper for maintaining those. You can go and deal with them all in one visit, whereas if you have 10 trees scattered over a wide ranging district, then it could take all day to just go and visit them and water them. But chopping up mulch, removing stakes when they start getting in the way, and inevitably not all the trees will survive. Hopefully 75 or 80% or more will survive, and more should survive if you look after them well and plant them well. And then the long-term management costs. I mean, if the trees are owned by a council, then they're going to almost certainly require surveying over time, maybe more detailed inspection, maybe relating to tree risk management, maybe relation to just a kind of standard kind of maintenance. If a London plane, for example, on a London street, if it's being pollarded, then it needs quite a lot of ongoing maintenance costs, whereas a tree, perhaps an oak tree in a park, may just be planted and not really need much work doing it for years and years. And maybe whether it's appropriate to kind of think about the felling costs, and then if you're thinking about costs into the future, thinking about interest and inflation, should you include those costs up front, or try and include them into a revenue for managing those trees, and having the staff to keep managing them and keep sorting out the contractual sides of things. So now we get on to the spreadsheet. I'm going to share, let's see if I can get the actual spreadsheet up. There we go. So this is the kind of first sheet of spreadsheet. I think having a cost model, as I've put together here, it's not perfect. It's just a model, and a model is never as good as reality. But the numbers that I've put in here may be quite useful for just estimating roughly how much it would cost to plant a tree. But there are places in this, well, there's a massive lookup table in the spreadsheet where there's the option for people to put in their precise costs that they know, so you can get a more precise costing. I'll just quickly show you, won't focus on this. There's a model for woodland planting. I guess it's probably very small, so you probably can't see much. I won't dwell on this too much, but working out the spacing of the trees, the area covering, this open space, the kind of pre-planting feasibility, the size of the trees. These are all different drop-down boxes for putting in different sizes, and discount rates relating to how many trees you're going to plant, and then a kind of management going forward from beating up costs to further costs, because I'm zoomed out at these all hash, but the numbers in in there, and creates a little chart depending on what figures you enter into the long-term management. Something similar I've done for the hedgerows without as much detail on the long-term management, but maybe including different sizes of trees, maybe including building a ditch and a bank, or planting wildflowers and standard trees in the hedgerow as well, which may be useful. But the main one that I was wanting to share is this model to do with standard, this kind of a standard cost model. So again, I should really say, I've got this little key at the top here, shows different colors that relate to what the meaning of the cell is. So yellow ones for entering information in, and this kind of a skin color has drop down, so you can put in depending on the size of the tree. If it's a medium tree, it changes the amount of soil volume that might be required, all the pre-planting costs, whether it's a containerized tree and the size of the tree, watering, how it's going to be dealt with. And I've got some consideration in here relating to some of the more engineered solutions. So green blue urban type system, and maybe the Stockholm system with the crushed stone, and some costs relating to the cost of traffic management. So at the moment, are these all set to no? If I just kind of change that to yes, it will immediately add up the costs. So this gives you, at the moment, it's set up for a fairly standard tree in a green space, and in this scenario, it cost £718 to plant that tree. And at the bottom here, I'll zoom out a little bit, in a similar way to the woodland model that I showed you. I've got all the way going out to the side, year 4, 5, 6, 7, got ongoing basic things in these top rows for beating up if you're going to be replacing a certain percentage, and then for longer term, say you can scroll out to somewhere in the future and to enter in maybe pollarding or something like that, and that'll add the cost in, and it will make a little add to this chart over here. Then final thing I was wanting to show on this model is I've got a massive lookup table. So I won't zoom out too far. Well, I'll zoom in a bit first and then zoom out. So you can see all these different costs. I found these costs back in October, a lot of these costs back in October 2019. They could be updated if you have your own rates, or if you know them at a certain date, then it can update them relating to CPI. And then this all goes back and informs those other sheets that I showed you for the standard or woodland or hedge. So it kind of brings the costs relatively up to date as kind of little lookup tables for discounting, and I've kind of produced a little bit of a model for working out various approximate costs of how much a tree might cost if it's bare rooted or containerized, and low, medium, and high costs for different sizes. It's because it costs vary so much for trees, I kind of worked it out on a little bit of a model basis, depending on the initial cost, it kind of multiplies up. I won't dwell on that too much. There's a little bit of a thing to do with the tree sizing, which relates to thinking about how long you're going to have to manage that tree. So a smaller tree that's fast growing might be only last for 60 years. An older tree might need to think about the management for a lot longer. Right, back to the PowerPoint. I'm going to whiz through these slides because they're just copies of the spreadsheet. And then just thinking about, I mentioned this kind of scenario, different trees, if you're planting them all together in one place, it's a lot more efficient than planting trees all spread out over place. Bulk discounts, if you buy lots of trees together, frequently they're a lot cheaper. That's the same with loads of different things. There'll be regional variation in costs in terms of labour and other things, and different contractors. I certainly know that there can be massive differences. One might charge twice as much to do a restricted fell of a tree, but be half as much for doing a crown lift. So yeah, there's lots of variation. I've tried to kind of average things out and put high, medium, and low examples. And so, in conclusion, when tree planting fails, it's never what was planned for or hoped for. So, better understanding of the costs can lead to better planning, and then, yeah, with well-planned trees, for more likely to become a reality, and then, yeah, better understanding of costs can lead to a better case for a more adequate budget. And that's it for me. So I ran over slightly. I'll stop sharing.
Fabulous. Many thanks, Philip. What an amazing piece of work you've been doing. So detailed and comprehensive. I know there's been a couple of comments in the chat about it, or you've been talking about the publishing, whether you're willing to publish your spreadsheet and share it with others.
Is it okay? I'm very happy for it to be shared. I think we're in conversations about maybe putting it up onto the TDAG website with the presentation, but I'm aware of a couple of little equations and things I need to try and iron out some gremlins in it. And it's just a version 1, and there may still be some little problems with it, but I'm happy for people to use it, and hopefully it will go on to inform better work in the future.
Brilliant. Are there any other burning questions at this stage?
I saw one, Susanna.
Yeah.
I saw Andrew, have future management costs been discounted?
So I'm no expert in kind of the long-term financial kind of modeling. I had put in a kind of a percentage to take into account the future cost something might be with inflation. That's something that someone far cleverer than I might be able to have better input into. I had to go at just on a very basic level, but there's a provision for changing the percentage there, and if I've got the equation wrong, then that could be changed as well. There's a few different questions, so I hadn't looked at this while I was presenting.
Is there anything else, Sue, that's got your eye?
I saw Joe, so I'm spinning up and down. Joseph had a question which I thought was quite interesting, but it's perhaps for the bigger discussion, which is how do we get an online calculator that everybody kind of subscribes to, so we all talk the same language. Perhaps we can come back to that sort of in the wider discussion.
Yeah, that'd be good. Okay. So in that case, I'll say thank you to Philip for your presentation, and we'll bring you back at towards the end for a wider group discussion, if that's okay.
And if people want to email me a question, it's philip.simpkin@buckinghamshire.gov.uk. I can't promise I'll get to everything, but I'll try. Brilliant.
Many thanks. So our next speakers today are David Coughlin from the National Trust and Anne Geluzo, Green Infrastructure Planning Consultant. They're going to be talking about the Urban Forest Accelerator costing approach. So over to you first, I think, David.
Yes, thanks, Susanna. Let me just share this. Is that coming up all right for you, Susanna?
Yes, it
cool.
is.
Great. Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm just going to do a very brief introduction and then hand over to Anne, who is the sort of mastermind behind all the technical detail on this. But I'm just going to introduce sort of the project that I am working on at the National Trust and some of the thinking behind where this tool comes from, which is essentially sort of building well, what we found out would be building on the work that Phil has just shown us. So the Urban Forest Accelerator is a project to the National Trust with the Community Forest Trust and the Woodland Trust. We are aiming to produce a route map of the sort of building blocks for local authorities to advance their urban forestry, and alongside that, a toolkit of resources. We know there's a lot of money and guidance around planting trees, but so as sort of Philip was just suggesting there, one of the questions that we really need to look at is the long-term maintenance, which I'm sure, as you all know, will only be when these trees reach maturity that we're planting, that they will really realize all the benefits they have. And so part of the outcomes of the project that we're running is to build a coalition of local authorities that can share these thoughts, agree some standards, and have a unified voice talking to DEFRA, DLUC, the Forestry Commission, and others. So we're sort of going through a series of workshops and pilots, getting input from different local authorities and the NGOs, and then working on different tools, seeking input into those, developing prototypes, going through an iterative process of developing them. So one of the sort of major work streams within this project is looking at finance. So it's sort of about building the business case for investment, identifying funding opportunities, new income streams, to sort of understand how we can develop blended public-private finance models. So rather than sort of replacing the public funding that is existing, how we can sort of supplement that with some private, potentially eventually repayable finance. So there's a number of sort of building blocks in this, including valuing what there is, valuing the uplift if places are to deliver these sort of ambitious urban forestry plans, understanding future costs, analysing the gaps, and then appraising the options for filling those gaps. The cost modelling that we're undertaking as part of this project sort of fits into that revenue and capital requirements bit. So what are going to be the future costs? Our sort of primary pilot location for the project is in Birmingham, and this was initially going to be a task to look at the future operating costs of managing urban forests. But what we were hearing from various people was that a tool to do this nationally, or a tool that would attempt to do this nationally, would be more useful to a broader range of people. And it was at that point that we, through talking to TDAG, found out about Philip's work. So the audience that we're intending for this is, decision makers, officers and local authorities working in planning, highways, transport, green space teams. And we specifically, as Susanna mentioned at the beginning, are thinking about it as a tool to consistently calculate commuted sums for developers. We had a very good conversation with Hen Abbott about this and the needs for that. And also, I think additionally, a tool to engage with a wider community of funders and sponsors, in both cases aiming to sort of demonstrate the long-term costs so they can be accurately weighed against any benefits, which in the workshop that we had on this with a number of local authority staff, that sort of balancing and comparison of a cost benefit was coming out as something that would be very important for people. So we sort of know this is a ubiquitous challenge, and as Philip sort of just shown, it seems to have almost endless variables. So we wanted at the outset to consult very widely, but also make sure that we were getting a really in-depth look at the details. So Anne has been undertaking desk-based research. There's been sort of targeted conversations with a number of people. We had that workshop with a slightly broader range of input. We have commissioned Finance Earth to who are environmental finance consultancy to produce the sort of model architecture. So they're going to be producing a prototype as soon as they can, which we will then be sharing for feedback. I think one of the other steps that Anne may well talk about, but just in case not, is that the sort of sourcing of data, we're trying to do that through a number of professional bodies rather than just through these targeted conversations. So London Tree Officer Association, the Municipal Tree Officer Association, to make sure that we sort of have the support of the members of those groups rather than developing it in a bit of a silo. And then I think the only other sort of key thing to mention here is that we're envisaging that this tool, when it's finished, will be hosted on a partnership website between the National Trust, Natural England, and then also hopefully hosted or linked to in some way from the TDAG site, because we know that is the sort of go-to place for some of this guidance, so that we will get the traffic from there. It will be useful to anyone who's looking for information on the TDAG website, but hopefully that it's hosting on a partnership platform between Natural England and the National Trust means it will be able to be kept up to date into the future. So from there, I'm going to pass over to Anne.
Thank you, David. So in terms of, Phil has done, as everybody's seen, an astounding and incredible piece of work, which the first thing we wonder is like, wow, how can we add to this? And so I think one of the areas of focus for the National Trust was really how do we support our urban area reach their canopy cover targets? And so and in doing so, bridging the tree equity gaps, so really bringing trees really close to people live. And so quite a focus on that individual sort of standard tree planting, the one tab that Phil showed us, as opposed to working on hedgerow, working more the model on hedgerow and woodland planting, which probably is variable, but is not where the struggle is in terms of understanding cost, in terms of where the hurdles today are. And so in terms of how we've been thinking of adding and building upon what's the incredible work Phil's done, has been first, as Phil mentioned, most of the cost, not all, but most of the cost he's collated were date back from 2019, and he's bringing them up to date to a degree using the CPI index. Some of those costs haven't necessarily all been in line with the average inflation because of all the turmoil that we know about. And so we're collecting baseline costs for 2023, early 2024 across the cost centers that the model includes. That's the first thing. Secondly, as David mentioned, we held a workshop with a range of stakeholders. Really, those stakeholders were sort of a range of very experienced arboricultural officers from councils around the country, different profiles of councils, county councils, unitary authority, London boroughs, to get a sense of how they would see a tool like that being used and any concerns they might have. And one of the things that came out strongly out of that discussion was concerns about producing one figure, which at the moment they are medium and low in Phil's model, which is really useful, but it isn't necessarily allowing to reflect the differences that exist regionally. For instance, the cost of doing work in London, where, in those boroughs that have 20 mile per hour limit, and that's the speed at which you do, and labor costs everything is more expensive, versus being somewhere out further afield in a different region. And those costs, there's labor costs, there's a range of other costs and variables that are important for a value tree planting, like a sort of simple, no frill, just street tree, lift the slab, build a simple tree pit, no load bearing, etc. In talking to tree officer, the biggest cost item at the moment is actually not the planting of the tree or even the creation of a very simple pit when there isn't one. It's the watering. And in that case, southeast of England is in a very different place than the northwest of England in terms of how much those costs represent because of the different needs in terms of amount of watering. So there's things like that that can, if you look at them, it has an impact on the final figure you produce. So we're trying to put parameters in the model so that we could have, to a degree, contextualized result to bring those results a bit closer to what they might be in the local context and allowing for that to be taken into account. Thirdly, we're going to try to, Phil's mentioned the importance of, making trees happen in cities usually require engineering works to various degrees. And those can represent a very big proportion of the actual total planting cost. In the effort to increase canopy cover and to bring the trees close to where people are, there's a lot of efforts to plant street trees. And in sort of the historic network of smaller streets, often it means there isn't space on the footpath. So there's a range of alternative locations, such as build-outs, or incorporating them trees to rather different sort of traffic calming filters, planting in medians. So all those sites, to unlock them, there's a costs. A very good example is the build-outs. And there are some areas where if street trees are going to be planted and its streets are going to remain friendly to pedestrians as they need to be, then, questioning the use of that curbside space to integrate within the car parking lane some tree planting is the approach to go. So how do we, what's the cost of doing that? So we want to try to reflect better some of those engineering works that might be needed to create a planting spot. And then also along those lines, we'd like to, it's incorporated in Phil's model already, but as something that either there's some basic assumption or the user can put their input, their own data. But if you don't have data on this, there can be very significant hidden costs related to highway access. And this applies not just to tree planting, but also to the long-term maintenance in terms of traffic management costs, depending on which segment of the highway network you're on. If you're in a below 30 miles per hour versus you're on a road that, at national speed limit, the burden you're going to experience in terms of traffic management costs are going to be very radically different. And that, I think, can be built into the model because it will have very significant impact, especially on maintenance costs, and that was added cost over time. I was talking to Jim Smith at one stage in this work, and he was telling me of his time when he was officer at Islington, and they've planted some trees in the median on Holloway Road in central London. Watering for establishment had to be done at night. And when they have to do some work on those trees, which is very not often, but every 10, 15 years, they have to remove some of the dead wood. Again, it has to be done at night, and the cost per tree is very high, as you can imagine. So there are things like that. The fifth area where we were going to try to really focus is the calculation of commuted sum payments, building in discount rates, which have been brought up in the discussion already, and building up also the ability for the user to define some of their parameters in terms of, are they going to take the whole life of the tree, or do they want to put a cutoff point? But providing a shared starting point in terms of what the base cost element might be, and a range for those costs based on those sort of contextual parameters I've mentioned already. And lastly, continue to enhance the ergonomics and usability. And as an example, one thing that Phil hasn't shown in his work is that in his spreadsheet, there are some buttons that allows to, if you don't want to write in all the specification for your project, and you want to know, and you want to just go with a sort of standard tree planting, you have a button that you can click, and that gives you, for that scenario, and you have 3 scenarios covered. And so what we're going to try to do is cover a wider range of scenarios so that there's some sort of very simple way, even if you're not necessarily a specialist, to, you know, generate some reasonable specification for different contexts. Can I go next, please? I am not going to cover that spreadsheet because I'm going to be too long otherwise. Can we just go to slide 6, please?
Sorry, it's coming up in parts, so I'm going to have to.
Yeah.
This one?
So yes, so those are the sort of 8 scenarios we're looking to sort of provide default calculation for, with always the ability for the user to tweak and amend, looking at, and those reflects what are the key drivers of costs in terms of pre-project planning, the planting itself, the establishment phase, and the maintenance phase, which is what the previous slide I have jumped over was trying to describe. We've tried to identify for each of those phases what are the key drivers of costs so that we focus our model on understanding those as opposed to necessarily knowing which type of tie you put, because that's just going to be such a peanut element of your final cost figure. And so we think there's a range of vehicle-dominated hard landscapes as a family, like build-outs, other carriageway locations, I've already mentioned the median, and car park, that are a set of scenarios that have commonalities, but also differences. That's why for instance, there will be no traffic management cost in a car park, but you will have the similar need for below ground, load-bearing, growing media. And the build out on top of some of the high traffic management and engineering, you'll have the cost of building the build out. So there's then a second set of scenario is our pedestrian dominated hard landscape, where you probably will not have, you might have some traffic management, but to a minimal element. And you'll have various degree of need of investment in some of the below ground specification. And the third sort of family of scenario are the softscapes, the highway verges, and the parks and grid space with different levels of profile, which then dictates the type of rootstock you might use, type of anchoring you might use. Voila. I'm going to, next slide, please. I'm conscious of time. So how you can help? We need your support. So far, I have 10 local authorities that have shared with us in confidence anonymized version of their schedule of rates. And I need more. So I'm looking for standard tree planting costs in hard and soft landscape, and I'm interested in those schedule of rates, those rates that you can get from contractors, together with the specification you use if you are commissioning tree planting, so that I know that once I treat those costs, I know that what I can add and what I cannot add, so that I don't add up apple to carrots, and then I compare costs that have similar specification. I'm also looking for highway engineering costs associated with planting. For instance, the cost of creating a tree pit, a simple tree pit for like simple street tree, the cost of creating a build out. Currently, I have 3 different local authorities that have provided me their costs. I'm interested. 2 are in London, only 1 is outside London. I'd like to have more outside London costs. I'm very interested in highway access costs because that really varies. So those traffic management, But also, for instance, if you create a build out in an area that has controlled parking, you have to modify the traffic regulation orders that give right for the highway to be used for parking and this controlled parking. And that usually modifying, I am told, a TRO can cost between 3,000 and 4,000 pounds. That's just on top of the cost of building the build out. And that's the local authority charging itself because to compensate for loss of parking revenue. So that's, I know the cost for one area. So I'm interested in understanding what, to have this one example, I'm interested in understanding how it works for other local authority, because as you can see, this is a very significant figure. I'm interested in maintenance costs. We're making the assumption in the model that we're planting the right tree in the right place, but there's still, besides inspection, for instance, since you're over the highway, depending on the type of highway, some degree of crown lifting, some removal of dead wood. There are some limited, but there are some maintenance costs, even if you're not going to pull out or you're not going to do crown reduction, although in some cases you might need to. We'll try to accommodate that to the model. And I'm lastly interested in end-of-life costs. Your tree felling, stump grinding or stump removal, and highway reinstatement costs. My email address is at the top of this slide. Feel free to get in touch. And thank you for your attention.
You're muted.
Anne, yeah, sorry. Many thanks, Anne and David there. Has anybody got any immediate questions for them? And I'm guessing in particular for Anne, I know you can't stay with us until the end of the meeting today.
And I picked up two, if it helps. And Martin Gammy said that David had referred to repayable finance, and we weren't quite sure what that meant. Martin, are you there?
I am here. Yeah, I answered in the chat, but
Okay.
essentially just finance from investors. So rather than philanthropic or sort of CSR contributions or donations, finance from investors that would produce an outcome that would be paid for in order to then repay the investors, meaning repayable, which I think Howard was talking about. British Airways Boulevard, Avios Avenue. So obviously, like with the caveats of not commodifying or privatizing public spaces, but finding a way to make that blended and for it to not supplant public finance.
Apart from
That's
all
a
the questions,
conversation for another day.
yeah. Apart from all the questions I've asked myself, this crown lifting, and what's the timescale for crown lifting? At what age of tree?
I mean, I think it's done in the first 20 years, depending on if it's a small growing or large growing. But if you have a large growing trees, you know, the first 15 to 20 years, you might need to, in terms of to lift it to 6 or 7 meters, which you could argue is sort of post-planting care. But if you sort of drag the post-planting care sort of 15 years after planting, it's those maintenance operation, I think, that sort of sits a bit at the...
And the problem is, if that was all part of the capital cost, we can't protect the budget for long enough, can we, to make sure it's carried out?
At the moment, this is the thing, because in terms of the usability of the tool from a user, if one is going to chase, for instance, the grants that exist for, as they are, I know from talking to Forest Commission and Jim, they're very open-minded into taking in particularly this work, and then informing their grant structure on the basis of that. But at the moment, it's just 2 growing season of 2 or 3 growing season of post-planting care. So if you're trying to design the model so that you can produce a figure for that up to that point, that cut point, then it's just 2-3 years that you have. There's some formative pruning that will happen there, but the crown lifting will not be finished. So
that's okay. I was starting to say, I really like the way that your work is building on the work that we saw from the first presentation from Philip. And I know one of the comments in the chat was about producing some kind of online tool. And I feel like maybe the first stages towards that are already being undertaken by the way you're already building on some existing work. And have we got a really sound starting point for what could be this online tool potentially? Again, I think maybe that's something we can pick up in the discussion towards the end. So thank you for your contributions, and I will come back to you for the panel discussion at the end. So our next speaker today is Luke Fay, who's the Managing Director at Treework Environmental Practice, and he's going to be talking about the cost-benefit comparison of smaller and larger tree planting and the impact on ecosystem, sense of place and community. So I'll hand over to you, Luke.
Thank you, Susanna. Let's see if I can get this right first time. Can everyone see my screen? Not on presenter view. I can't see any of you.
We can see you.
Yeah, we can see you.
Oh, that's not working. Oh, that'll be because I've, yeah, rookie error. I'll share my screen now and try again. Ready.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, who knew? Right. So good afternoon, everyone. And Phil, and David, that's really impressive work. Makes me feel pretty humbled. I don't think I've got that impressive a presentation, but I'm going to crack on with this. So I'm Luke Fay I'm Managing Director at Treework Environmental Practice. My presentation is going to look at the costs and benefits of trees, and I'm going to particularly focus on ecosystem services, but I'll look at some of the other ways of the other metrics. And I've got 3 key messages. I think one, retain and plant trees for success. If we're serious about planting and retaining trees to deliver benefits, then we must be aiming to have them in the landscape for a sufficient length of time. I would say, and you may have heard me say this before, that we have a 70-year design life for buildings. We should have at least a 100-year design life for trees, where that's appropriate for the species. My second message is large and longer lived trees provide more value than smaller trees. And third message is planting larger trees. So planting larger trees has its place. However, the risks of planting large trees, that is to say large at the time of planting, the risks of failure are high, and so sufficient investment is required for success. And I'll have a kind of made up case study later about that. I'm going to be heavily referencing TDAG's guidance, trees planning and development, a guide to delivery, and I'm sure all of you all have it, and if you don't, you should. Some caveats: I'm not an economist, and I'm not a statistician, but I'm quite free with making claims around valuing things. I'm only looking at what we tend to call urban tree planting. I'm not looking at forestry. I will look at other ways of valuing trees than just ecosystem services, but mainly I'm looking at ecosystem services. Some of the areas that I will explore, like the price of carbon, will take me well out of my comfort zone, but I'm going to do it anyway. I've got some thank yous and apologies. Sorry, I'm going to go over some old ground, and if you've seen presentations from me before, I'm sorry if that's boring. And thank you to all those who've been very generous with their knowledge, particularly Kenton, Rogers, Kieran Doik, Andy Heerans, and Neville Fay. Right, so onwards. We often try to present pictures like this to people who are outside of the arboricultural sector, where we present the benefits of trees and try to get them to engage with these. These, of course, are also from TDAG, various TDAG documents, and just to go into those quickly, you know, we've got energy saving, property value, stormwater attenuation, shade and cooling, aesthetic values, urban forest food, storing carbon, that's going to come up again, biodiversity and habitat, landscape screening, assisting recovery from illness, being a focal point. That's and here we have some stats against some of these, and we continue in the same vein with how trees enhance health and well-being, and more around the benefits here. So again, I'm sure you're all very familiar with these. And then the trees planning and development guide for delivery also includes information on what I like to call both the benefits and the crapafits, and the crapafits occur in these instances probably where you've got wrong tree in the wrong place, and so right tree in the right place is what we need to aim for, whether we're making sure that place suits the tree or the tree suits the place, in order to ensure the longevity of the trees we retain and the trees that we plant, so that they can give us all of those benefits. So currently the popular tools, I say popular, the most used tools for calculating benefits from trees are in the UK are iTree and CAVAT, and we also have biodiversity net gain, which I'll touch on quickly here. iTree really looks at a whole range of ecosystem services and provides monetary values for those. CAVAT puts really looks at the amenity of trees, but amenity as it's defined includes services that trees provide. And biodiversity net gain, as people who are familiar with it know, is really a planning tool. Trees are just a tiny part of that, and quite strangely calculated, to be generous. However, one of the key elements of biodiversity net gain is that habitat enhancements must be secured by an appropriate legal agreement for at least 30 years. Now, reference to this will come up later in the presentation. I just think it's really important that we are thinking long term when we are thinking about making decisions about trees, because tree time is much longer than people time. So for any of these metrics, or calculation systems, sorry, would be a better term, the trunk is one of the key metrics that is measured, and it's fairly easy to measure, and it provides a baseline for all of these at some level. However, in terms of the value that trees are providing, the crown is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, the branches and leaf-bearing parts and the leaves of the tree, and particularly when it comes to ecosystem services. And so when you think about rainwater interception, when you think about shade, so cooling and shelter, when you think about carbon sequestration rather than carbon storage, and when you think about air quality enhancements as well. The Crown is working on all of that, but also when you think about sense of place, you know, the large canopy trees are particularly significant in those values. So the I think the important message here is that when we're making decisions in relation to trees, and particularly in relation to trees and development, larger trees will provide more of the benefits than smaller trees. And that is true of small trees, as in newly planted small trees, but also trees that don't reach as large a stature provide less benefits than trees that grow to a larger size. Where we need to remove mature trees, it's often not possible to replace their benefits in the short term. So, for instance, you can't replace the tree on the right with the tree on the left immediately. So, where we want larger species and trees to thrive, we must provide enough space for them above and below ground. And so what we need to do is consider the trees and how they will develop over time. So we'll also need to remember that trees grow, and that this and so, you know, this tiny little tree could become this much larger tree, with the implications for the environment around it. And so both the environment that's provided for the tree is important, but also how that tree fits in with its environment both now and in the future is really important to consider. But it will only but the tree will only become its full potential if it's provided with the resources and space and appropriate root environment. And so this is essential for retained trees, just as it is for newly planted trees. If we're going to put the effort and investment into retaining a tree, including the loss of developable space, we need to make sure that it will be successful. If these are not provided, then you can have all the strategies in the world, but you will not meet your targets. So let's look at the model that TDAG's given for cavat growth over time. And one of the things that this demonstrates is that trees are an appreciating asset, and that term comes up a lot, and it's reflected in the models that we look at later for ecosystem services. And so TDAG's also provided this this model for within the same document for looking at the numbers of trees that would be needed to replace the values provided by, for instance, a 60 centimeter DBH beech tree that is removed. And it's really important to recognize that there's a great deal of variation depending on the species size at planting and when they're planted, and of course how successful they are. There's also a new tool from Forest Research for doing this. So you can enter the details of a tree that you're removing, and you can enter the details of one or several trees that you're proposing to replace it with, to see if it's going to return those values for instance, carbon storage, carbon sequestration, rainwater runoff, pollution removal, and cavat value, in fact. So this is an incredible tool, and it's on the Forest Research website. So the TDAG document also sets out some calculations that can help you in quantifying and understanding the cost of mitigation planting. These are here, but also we've also seen some incredible tools in the two previous presentations that covered these really well. And again, with my next slide, I'm just touching on the fact that there's a lot of, if you're calculating the costs of a tree over its lifetime, we need to be considering propagation and nursery costs, transport prior to planting, the establishment, care, management. That includes salaries of people, for instance, but also infrastructure costs and materials, and mature tree maintenance, which and removal, both of which have been highlighted in the questions in relation to the previous presentations. Yeah, so this is a lot of this has been touched on in much better detail than I can do now. So I'll come on then to my experience of looking at the costs and benefits over time using ecosystem services. So I worked with Treeconomics to look at a population of almost 1,500 trees, 173 retained, almost 1,300 newly planted trees, and look at the ecosystem services of carbon sequestration, pollution removal, and rainwater interception. And you can see from this graph that the initial costs are high, but the benefit curve rises steeply to surpass the costs at 45 years in this case. And I've looked at other studies by Treeconomics where 30 years is the tipping point, 40 years is the tipping point. But this is quite common, and I think the key message here is we have to be planting for the long term. If and I'll come to this in a minute, but if we're looking at removing trees or expecting trees to fail, or allowing trees to fail, sorry, then we're losing those benefits, or we're losing the point at which those benefits outweigh the costs. Other studies produced show, yeah, that this crossover point is 30 to 40 years. And the way the green line works here is that short-lived trees are removed and replaced at 60 years. But you can see then, you can see that the value rises up to the 60 years, then the speed at which it rises drops off as the short-lived trees are removed and replaced, and then the value rises again to 120 years and it drops off. But it's really interesting to look at details around this, because long-lived trees like London Plane just carry on delivering benefits at greater and greater rates from beyond, up to 200 years and beyond. And just to, I was listening to, or I attended the TDAG's Closing the Performance Gap presentation with that Keith Saker, Rupert Bentley-Walls and Andy Heron's presented at, and I was really struck by some of Andy Heron's messages in that. You know, we've got some really worrying messages here, which aren't new, but just reminded me in the context of what I've just been talking about, how far we've got to go. So failure rates of 10 to 80% within 1 year of planting. Average young tree mortalities are 25%. Sorry, I've overlapped 2 slides, so we're losing some of that in here. Urban tree life expectancy, 19 to 28%. So what does that mean in relation to returning the benefits, so at a point that they outweigh the costs? Equally, he touched on how trees planted at smaller sizes actually outperform trees planted at larger sizes. And also he talked about how the momentum of establishment is so important, and he really listed out how that has implications for the amount of carbon that is removed from the air. So really brilliant presentations by everyone at that seminar, and I really recommend it, and it really reflects interestingly on what I'm talking about. So I'm going to just give you a quick case study. I'm pretty sure I'm overrunning, but I'm going to crack on anyway, which is partially made up. And it just sets some context for what I'm saying with a kind of extreme scenario. So imagine you order a featured tree from a German nursery, and maybe it's a 90 to 100 meter girth sized tree. So it's a big tree. So approximately 30 centimeters in diameter. So one way, the journey is around 500 kilometers, and the tree, and that is equal to 0.66 tons of CO2. And the tree is so large you can only hold one tree on the truck. So the truck brings the tree across to central London and you plant it. But unfortunately, the tree dies. Now, you've now spent you've now, whatever money you spent, don't worry about that. 0.66 tons of CO2 has been, and let's assume it's a one-way journey, and the truck fills up with, I don't know, crates of something else to take back. So we're only dealing with that one journey. So as far as I can make out from the government's Green Book, this is equivalent to the value of £175 in CO2 costs if we use a carbon value of 265 per tonne. So using the forest research tool, I tried to calculate what how long it would take a tree of this size to return that value. And it would take, as far as I can make out, about 30 years for a tree with a stem diameter of 30 centimeters. So so this is a made up case study, but actually this type of planting and planting failure is happening all the time in landscape schemes, and I just don't think we're properly taking into account how the ecosystem service costs of tree planting. Whilst I'm really actually quite in favor of large tree planting, I do think, as with everything I've said throughout this presentation, if we don't invest in the infrastructure to make trees successful, then we're failing in our role, but we're also failing okay, I'm going to say it, failing the planet. So yeah, that's my final message. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. A very thought-provoking presentation there. Especially struck by your slide with showing how long it takes for the costs, for the benefits to outweigh the initial costs involved. And I've seen there's quite a lot of discussion that's been going on around what should be included in commuted sums or not, and the length of time that we should be asking for sums to be provided for. If anyone's got any quick questions now, any burning questions, otherwise I'm proposing we go straight on to our next speaker. Okay, so thank you, Luke, and we'll pick up with you in the panel discussion again at the end. So our final speaker today is Rob Taylor from DEFRA, who's going to be talking about some funding support for local authorities. So Rob, are you there?
Yeah, thank you very much. Is that appeared okay?
Yeah, we've got your speaker notes, Rob.
Oh yeah, oh, okay.
The presentation at the moment.
Is that still speaking out? So is that just a presentation?
Presentation now, perfect.
Right, great. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So firstly, many thanks to TDAG for allowing us this platform to talk to you about the government funding mechanisms for local authorities to establish trees outside of woodlands. I'm Rob Taylor. I work for DEFRA on their tree health team, and part of what we do involves providing financial assistance for the restoration of treescapes. And we've also got Emma Seeley with us today from the Forestry Commission, as well as Louise Hill from DEFRA Tree Health, who gladly respond to comments in the chat, as well as answering any questions you may have afterwards. So I do apologise to any non-local authority people here, but as I'll explain, many projects launched using these funding mechanisms do involve community groups and local and external partners. So we do welcome that wider discussion and input from all stakeholders. Has that moved on? Okay. Yep. So as a bit of background and context, I'll briefly describe the framework behind much of the government funding for tree planting in England. So the Nature for Climate Fund was initiated in response to the need to safeguard and enhance carbon storage and biodiversity in natural systems. And so 750 million was released, and 500 million pounds of which has been allocated to increasing tree cover. So it's not an insignificant amount of money that's involved, and much of it is intended to assist practitioners, such as many of you here, to achieve their tree planting ambitions. So then the England Trees Action Plan was created as a strategic framework for this, and trees outside woodlands were separated from woodland expansion, and the recognition of the value of this type of tree cover and the problems it faces led to the launching of the Local Authority Treescapes Fund, or the LATF, to allow local authorities to work in partnership with NGOs and local landowners and community groups to deliver strategic planting and natural colonisation of trees outside of woodlands. And it's this scheme that I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon. So I've no doubt that you're all aware of the value of trees outside woodlands, and I think they've increasingly become a big part of the conversation in recent years. But to reiterate, we're defining these as urban and rural single trees, or groups of trees, or small woods below ½ a hectare, and they make up 19% of the tree cover in Britain. So that's 773,000 hectares, and collectively they provide, the myriad benefits such as habitat connectivity and carbon sequestration and sense of place and so on. So they've been estimated to contribute 1.4 billion to the country's economy annually. But they're under threat. They're declining in overall condition and distribution, and they become badly affected by pests and diseases, particularly ash dieback, as ash is one of, if not the most common tree species found outside of woodlands. And then there's numerous other issues, such as the aging population of our hedgerow trees and development pressures and so on. So they become a particular priority with a plant health policy. So enter the Local Authority Treescapes Fund. So it's been around since 2021, and I would imagine that many of you have become familiar with the LATF by now, and maybe you've been involved in applications and projects, but it's the key government offer to restore and enhance tree cover outside of woodlands. And the scheme is now accepting applications for its 4th round, and has changed since its early rounds in that now several different types of councils may apply. And this includes borough district councils, county councils, as well as unitary and metropolitan boroughs. But that said, many successful LATF projects have been collaborative in nature and involved other landowners such as the NHS and charities and individuals, the Wildlife Trust, etc. But they've always had a lead local authority handling the administration. So applications for capital grants to cover materials and labour may be made for a minimum of £50,000. And one particular announcement we're making now is that there's now no upper limit on the funding that may be applied for. So we've removed the previous cap of 300,000, but that said, applications should still try and demonstrate value for money. And also applications are now processed on a 2-month moving window basis, which means that they're processed much sooner than they would have been when the annual deadline was in place. And funding covers one winter of direct tree planting, be it whips, feathers or standards, and may also be used to assist natural colonisation. But also 3 years of maintenance after the planting year, such as watering and weeding, receives funding assistance, and that's calculated on a per tree basis. So planting can take place, for example, in public parks and street sides, garden verges, etc. I just need to move this screen up a bit, sorry. But there is a catch in that the scheme is designed as a tree replacement fund. So trees that in urban areas that are lost may be replaced using this funding, but within rural areas, any type of whip or feather or even standard trees may be planted. There's, you know, there can be extra trees. So since it began in 2021, the scheme's funded the planting of over 350,000 trees and a further 210,000 committed to being planted, which spans over 127 separate applications in England. And the majority of these projects have been collaborative and involved several local authorities and other groups such as the Wildlife Trust, the NHS and National Park authorities. But we've had a huge variety of innovative projects carried out, which have included reinstating hedgerow trees, amenity tree planting in public parks and street sides, and Miyawaki type planting in urban areas, and tree planting within schools, as well as abandoned land and farmyard shelter belts. But some of the most successful and impacting projects have been have involvement from community groups and school groups and volunteers to assist with ingraining that sense of ownership and participation. So far, £13.5 million has been released to the fund and labour to fund materials and labour for these projects. But this does fall short of the pot of money that is available for these projects. And there is a lot more funding available, and uptake hasn't been quite what we anticipated. So we're very keen to get any feedback and try and design future iterations of this project to have more uptake and impact. So I'll use the next few slides discussing the process of building up the information that's required to complete a funding bid for the LATF. As we're aware, it can be perceived as being burdensome, a burdensome process requiring detailed, large amounts of data and maps of tree species, distributions, and tree planting locations, but this is often not the case, and reviewers are largely seeking approximate figures and descriptive accounts of the current condition and extent of trees outside of woodlands. But there are various tools for quantifying tree cover and identifying areas of low canopy. iTree Canopy, for example, is free to use and very quick and simple way to estimate tree cover at the ward scale or even finer scales. And then there's the National Forest Inventory Map, which is also available through the Forestry Commission and provides canopy cover per ward based on previous iTree surveys, as well as opportunity mapping for tree planting. And there's many other free online resources such as Observatory, which will quickly provide spatial information on pest and disease distribution and threats, which could all be fed into an application. And also keep an eye out on the Forest Research website too, as an extensive trees outside a woodland survey and mapping tool is soon to go online, which will hopefully prove to be a valuable tool for information gathering and identifying opportunities. So in terms of opportunity mapping and identifying locations for planting, there's various ways this can be done, and we'd highly welcome any input and hear of innovative ways of doing this. But firstly, how many trees have been felled recently, and have or can they be replaced directly? Some LATF projects have solely focused on how many vacant planting pits there are in the council's boundaries and simply replace them with standards using LATF funding. But beyond that, we'd advise gathering information on available land for tree planting well ahead of creating an application, and keeping records using simple GIS database for tree survey software. And also involve local communities and identify areas and liaise with park managers and schools, and perhaps consider whether aging trees are due to be lost in the coming years, and think about perhaps shadow planting now as future replacements. But again, precise locations are not required, but do try to accumulate information on appropriate numbers and species, and use online decision tools such as the ecological site classification or the urban tree manuals, etc. So now, as I say, many successful LATF bids have been collaborative and have involved a number of different landowners carrying out very different types of planting across a single bid. So first off, approaching neighbouring or lower tier local authorities and find out if they have areas they'd like to see tree planting on, and then consider utility companies such as water boards and whether they have land, for example, catchment land, they'd like tree planting to take place on. And then, of course, academic institutions, schools, and so on have been heavily involved in many LATF projects in the past, and there have been several successful collaborations with charities such as the Wildlife Trust and nature reserves. But also consider the input and services that volunteer groups might be able to offer, as many of the most successful LATF projects that have been carried out have had the aid of volunteers, and a good source of guidance and consultation on the consultation, engagement and communication when involving volunteer groups is the FC forestry standard, which highlights the ways in which local communities can be involved and contribute to the success of tree planting projects. And finally, consider potential suppliers. So approach local nurseries and discuss their procurement of planting stock, but also know that biosecurity certification is quite important within LATF projects, and we would usually require the plant healthy certificate to go alongside applications. So by now you should have all the information you need to tackle an application form, which, as lengthy and detailed as it seems, we really hope shouldn't be a barrier to launching a bid. And we're continually trying to improve the transparency and alleviate the perceived barriers of the process, as we realize it may sound competitive and strict, but the truth is that today very few applications have been flat out rejected, and we may ask for clarification on further detail, but we want to see as many LATF projects being launched as possible, and want to make the scheme as attractive and impactful as it can be. So the application pack is available on the .gov website and contains the application form, the project cost calculator, and guidance documents that will assist you within each step of the process. So we are dedicated to continually improving these schemes and trying to make them as effective as possible. So we really do value any feedback to gain an understanding of the experiences of applicants and would-be applicants. And the team here at DEFRA and the Forestry Commission, we want to see more trees in this country and build resilience into our treescape. So we'd love to hear from you and have your input, as this is the only way we can keep evolving the LATF and create improved future iterations of the scheme. So that's my email at the top, and I will respond to anything I receive. And also, this is the general inquiry email for the LATF, as well as the URL for the main webpage of the scheme. So so that's me, and yeah, thanks very much, and good luck with your applications and any of your planting projects.
Many thanks, Rob. Are there any initial questions for Rob? I know your colleague's been busy in the background answering questions in the chat. Sue, you've got.
I did see one from Pete Stevens. Does the fund only apply to the purchase of trees, or could an application fund the actual growing of the trees instead? Our community tree nurseries helping increase the secondary benefits of tree production, reduce transport and get local buy-in for tree planting, same outcome, trees in the ground, but much higher overall societal benefit.
So it funds materials, but it also funds the labour to plant the trees. And when choosing nurseries, local commercial nurseries will be considered within the bid if there's good justification of the value for money that they would provide. But generally, the bigger nurseries with plant healthy certification will be needed. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I had my own question, if I can ask it. You mentioned all sorts of really interesting projects that are taking place. I just wondered if DEFRA is keeping any sort of case study record or anything of them, so that, you know, it's available for people to sort of draw on as sort of learning?
Yeah, we do have 2 case studies online on the .gov website, but that's from the first round, and so they're from a few years ago, and we are actually in the process of trying to put you know, the more kind of up-to-date case studies together that have, you know, more of these kind of varied and mixed projects. And there's been a lot of Miyawaki style planting going on, and lots of other interesting ones. Somebody planted a tree maze that was designed by local school children. So there's, yeah, a lot of innovation, and yeah, a lot of trees gone in.
Thanks.
Fabulous. Okay, so if I can ask all of the speakers to put their cameras back on, please. We'll move into a sort of panel discussion phase. So is there anyone here who's asked a question, either asked a question that hasn't yet been picked up on in the chat, or has got an issue question you want to raise with any of our panel here today? If you can put your camera on, I think then you should come to the front screen here and I can see you. So I guess to get things going a bit, I've seen quite a lot of discussion around the different costs associated with planting and establishing and maintaining the trees. And I guess there's been a kind of discussion about what could or should be included in commuted sums and what shouldn't be, and whether our panel have any opinion on that. So how long should we be including the costs of tree management or not? There's seems to be differing views from it should just be the upfront costs to establish the tree to sort of lifetime costs of the maintenance management of that tree. Philip, would you?
The other bit I saw, sorry Susanna, was that could the costs of planting the trees be part of the calculation for the commuted sums? I suppose reflecting the value of the tree in the point of planting. You know, has it been an expensive one in a hard landscape or something simple in a park, which is different? Well, it wouldn't have a commuted sum, of course.
Is there anyone on our panel? Philip?
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense in relation to Sue's kind of add-on question there that at least part of the cost of planting is considered in commuted sums because they don't all survive, and so as a percentage of the kind of cost that it might take to replant any one tree, and then if the commuted sum is covering several trees, then I guess that hopefully it will cover the cost. In relation to the kind of broader question of what costs should be included in commuted sums, there's some costs that I didn't include in the model, things like kind of street cleaning and clearing up leaves and that sort of thing, that may be costs relating to trees. It's difficult because when you add all these costs together, it can be quite expensive, but someone's got to pay for them, and so I guess that ideally it should be covered in the commuted sum.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that from what Luke was saying, you know, like a very, very clear case for the fact that maturity is, you know, the key consideration and how much benefit is delivering, and that reaching that maturity is going to be based on the initial planting conditions, but also the maintenance. So I think to give a as full a picture as we can, including the maintenance costs in the commuted sums and in the calculation of the, you know, the full life cost of the tree is essential.
So, I mean, you know, as I alluded to, there's kind of a mechanism for this in BNG in the sense that it's not intended for that, but you know, we under BNG, you know, the net gain needs to be secured for 30 years, and you know, sufficient resources need to have been allocated to that.
I saw another question. So it's awful, isn't it, rolling around this thing? Sandra, are you there on the call anywhere? It was a question. I think it was in relation to David and Anne's presentation, to ask whether the tool would actually inspire the local authority to invest in trees. But
Was that in relation
Still
to
here,
Philip's original presentation?
yeah, Sandra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Can you pose it better than I've managed to?
Yeah. Yeah, that's me here in the video as well. Yeah, so I was wondering, I mean, I really like to see the tools and the great development of these. But I wonder in terms of actual decision making by local authorities, if this is really the kind of information that will make a difference. Yeah, so to what extent do you think it will really lead to more trees eventually?
Philip, as a local authority person, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it's part of the information that is kind of crucial for making the case. I think without having good knowledge of what it costs to plant and maintain a tree, then it's difficult to get the required amount of funding to ensure that it is done properly. So often trees are planted without the long-term thoughts in mind, or even just the relatively short-term costs of establishment. So yeah, if it's better understood, then I think the case can be made, but it's very much down to the person making the case. It's just kind of having the information is just one part of that, and then it's whether the case is made well to those decision makers, and whether those decision makers are receptive, and whether, even if they are receptive, whether they have the money to plant the trees. And I guess that what goes on to the presentation Rob gave. So it seems like there's some money available. So maybe it can all knit together nicely.
I think someone else mentioned in the chat as well. Like, I think it's a good example of the fact that DEFRA have a cost calculator within the funding process for the LTAF. It's like sort of an essential step of convincing anyone to give you the money. But then I think someone mentioned the tree equity score platform that the Woodland Trust have just published in the chat as well. And I think that sort of piecing this together and working out how it operates with some of these other tools will give people like a sort of arsenal of weapons to make the case for that funding. So if you've got your tree equity tool and you know where you want to prioritize your funding, you know how many trees you want to put in that place to reach a target canopy cover, and then you can demonstrate there's a need for it and this is how much it's going to cost us. And then if I think maybe the piece that we're trying to work out how we add to this is then having a side-by-side comparison of these costs and the associated benefits would be the strongest way to make that case. But we're sort of building it up bit by bit.
I would say also, just to add a little bit more, that the cost of planting a tree is one part of it, but the cost of having a tree officer in a local authority is another important part. And I certainly know that the local authority I work for, that the tree officers are massively overstretched, and I'm sure that they'd like to think about planting more trees. They do plant trees, but trying to make the time to make the case, kind of secure the funding and then kind of implement it, it's a nice to have in some instances, rather than what they are pressurized to do as part of their day job. So it's making sure that councils have the resources to do the basics, and then they can think about kind of getting the case together and putting the time into kind of getting the funding for doing the actual planting.
So did you want to add?
Yeah,
something?
I was going to say, Kate raised a point, because there's so much interest and so on about the need for community engagement and making communities, and communities have power to make things happen because politicians do respond to community things. Kate's question, I don't know if you're there, Kate, but are any costs included on community engagement? Do you want to pick that one up with more clarity than I have?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I completely understand that the more you add to the list of costs, you know, the bigger the cost gets, and it starts to feel. I mean, looking at that spreadsheet, it's a wonder if that any of us get any trees in the ground at all. But you know, this is about urban trees, and I guess the risk of not engaging the community is that no matter how well you plant them, if the community isn't engaged, there's a risk that they'll get vandalized or, you know, pulled up or whatever. So yeah, I mean, obviously, Trees for Cities, that's what we do. And, you know, again, completely understand the restrictions of local authority capacity around community engagement, and that it can be seen as a nice to have, but it's really not. So it'd be great to see some costs involved included in those calculations, and we'd be happy to share our own costings and experiences of doing that piece of work.
That's brilliant, and I think it's a really important point about it. You know, it's the process we go on. It's not just the product of the tree in the ground. It's everything that goes alongside that, I think.
I'd just add to that as well. I think Ruth just made a point in the chat as well about political commitments not being followed up with funding, and part of the, you know, part of the purpose of these tools is to sort of just make the case for, you know, all of the cost categories. And I think if part of the use of it is to you know, educate leaders on what is necessary for the long-term success of the trees, then including community engagement and saying like this is an essential part of this process. It's not a nice add-on. Like for that sort of lobbying and advocacy internally would be useful.
It's a good communication tool in its own right, the tool, which I think brings us on very nicely to the idea that was raised, and we've brought it up several times during today's meeting about are we looking to create an online tool here that can be used by others? Is it a kind of cost and benefit tool that helps to detail in building on Philip's very detailed work and David and Anne's follow up to that, and some of the benefit stuff that Luke was bringing in and so on? Is there potential to bring that all together into some kind of collaborative tool that we can all feed in our data and expertise into? Luke, would you like to?
Sounds like an Innovate UK grant application to me. Sounds like it evidently has benefits, and a lot of the work has been done already, but maybe also a lot of the work's in different places. But I would have thought someone skilled at coordinating grant applications could get funding for that without a doubt. There's quite a bit of Innovate UK grant funding going towards technology that improves climate resilience and response to climate change. So I think there's great opportunity there.
Fabulous. I've seen Ruth in the comments is shouting yes please with lots of exclamation marks at us. Anyone else want to build on that idea a little more?
Can I just ask how close we actually are to getting such a tool? There's so much work gone on. Philip's done all his work. David and so on are doing their work. How is it such a huge leap to actually have something that would at least be a good starting point, would start sort of informing and guiding? You know, do we see we could do it within our capabilities? Do we need to turn to DEFRA and say help, we need a bit of a push here?
I think our intention, so our project, which is funded by DEFRA through the National Lottery Heritage Fund, is running until October next year. But our intention is to sort of produce something like that, which will be, you know, hopefully a you know, fairly user-friendly online calculator, which might, at least in the first place, be a in the format of a spreadsheet. But we are also planning to sort of feed all of this into a larger program of work with local authorities, looking at green infrastructure more generally. So I think that the part of what we need to do to wrap up this current project that we're in over the next year is think about the bits of work that we've sort of like opened a can of worms and need more need more, specific focus on. And as Luke said, the National Trust isn't a specific urban tree organisation, but we do have a role, I think, in coordinating some funding applications and things like that. So I think it's on our agenda to make it happen. I think we'll get some of it done in the process of this project, building on what Phil's done, and sort of maybe, I don't want to say simplifying it, I don't know, sort of streamlining in a way that takes all the brilliant work that Phil's done and the exhaustiveness of it, and makes it available for everyone. But then to delve into the sort of relation to the benefits at a later stage.
David, I think you put your finger on a few things there, because looks like there's brilliant tools that people could use. Thing is, well, if you host something online that lots of people are engaging with, then you need to have kind of gone through that testing process and have have a user interface that people can engage with. But I've just put something out there which is, having done that, maybe it then becomes a brilliant research tool, because people are capturing information within the calculator that then could be part of a research program to build our knowledge as well. So
that's a really interesting point, and something I was thinking, it's almost like it's an evolving tool, isn't it, that needs to be like with capacity for people to add in extra information and comments and thoughts about what's not being captured, or and having seen your presentations, I felt like it was potentially just more of how it was packaged up, and the user interface, like you say, like that is where the main work is needed now, potentially. Sorry, Philip, you wanted
I was just going to say, because when I was putting all that information together, it was just kind of just collecting lots and lots of bits of information and trying to make sense of it. And I thought, well, trying to work things out in a spreadsheet, it was the easiest way for me to try and just make sense. And it kind of developed with just trying to be a place for me to put information and try and coordinate thoughts. It wasn't really, I didn't kind of think from the end of a user experience, and it certainly isn't perfect from a user experience. I think a fully usable one would have lots of bits of information to explain what the different things mean, which is not what the spreadsheet is at the moment. People could probably work a lot of it out just by playing around with it, but I'm sure that David and National Trust team, people they've got working, will kind of manage to make something that's much more user friendly.
So I don't know how to get my yellow hand up, so I keep sticking my hand up. So it's got lots of implications, hasn't it? Because we actually know how to plant trees in all sorts of situations. We know how to enable them to survive. We know how to manage them, and so on. We come up against barriers because we come up against viability discussions in new developments and so on. We've got some things on our side with MPPF requiring all new streets to have trees, which is good. And we've also got the whole climate and biodiversity breakdown, which is actually giving good reasons for needing more canopy cover, and therefore, the importance of protecting and maintaining our existing trees and planting more trees. So there's lots of things on the side of doing it, and the only missing bit is the arguments for investing to get it right, what it actually costs to do it. Whole life costs are more difficult because the people giving money this year are long gone in 100 years' time. So although it's a good return on investment argument, it doesn't always butter the parsnips when you need them in that way. But it's sort of, so this having a tool that can actually say, it costs you this, we know how to do it, this is how you do it in these different situations, which we're trying to do some drawings of for DLUC. This is how much it costs to do it, this is what it costs to maintain it, this is the cost of failure that therefore justifies the cost of investing and doing it right. What's that? How do we? Are there any more arguments left against it?
Yeah, another line on Luke's graph of benefit, that's sort of the cost of maintenance and planting over time, to show that if it keeps failing, the cost is going to remain very high, would be a good way to make that argument. If you could just put that in, Luke, that would be, yeah, thanks.
So
Yeah, it's a good idea.
I think that's the end of our discussion for today, but I know we were very keen to try and carry on this discussion beyond today, to take some of these ideas and see how we can work together on them. So please do email any thoughts through to Sue. Would that be the best place? Yeah.
Yep, that's fine.
And Anne specifically had asked for some information to be sent over to her if you've got anything there to add in at this stage. Thank you very much to all of our speakers today. It's been really interesting, really good to hear all the work that's going on, and very exciting where we can take it to next, I think. So I'll pass back to Sue now.
Oh, well, I'm going to thank you, Susanna, for chairing so admirably. We got through everything in time. To everybody who's taken part, including all the people who've attended, I will have saved the chat. Let me just make sure I have, because I'll actually try and analyze it so that we can also put that on the website with the various links and things. We've obviously had quite a number of local authorities on the call, so presumably, David, they're of value to you if they've got things to feed back.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's our last seminar for 2023. We start again on the 16th of January, looking at good examples of things happening around the UK, because we thought we'd start off with some positive good news. And Tony Kirkham's going to chair that. You can find all the forthcoming seminars under events on our website. Past seminars are under past events on the website. So we will get the recording up as quickly as we can. And we do have a Trees and Design Action Group stand at Future Build next year, which yes, is in London at Excel, 5th to 7th of March. And we're doing it with 6 partners, of which the Mersey Forest is one, Trees for Cities is another, Woodland Trust is another. So, and there's going to be some interesting workshops that day too. So there's definitely an interest in trees. And yesterday, the Good Homes Alliance told me that they want to do a lot more work on trees in their own work. So the word is definitely spreading. But it's not just people with a tree bent, but it's actually starting to extend across all sorts of professionals who are realizing they need to take an interest. So that is pretty well it from me. I think we knew this was going to be a first session on funding, so let's keep that discussion going. And